stop. The Russians did the same thing, but the scientists in their analysis said, boy, if the Russians use that as a threat, as a weapon against us, instead of having to target each one of our 1,000 missile silos, they could just detonate one high above the earth, and while a missile's in powered flight, and knock out several that would be in flight, not have to hit each one of them, and it would be very easy for them to do this. And somebody said, yeah, but can't we do the same thing to them? And they said, no, because we're smarter than they are. We're advanced. Our missile system had a guidance system that uses integrated circuits, was very susceptible to the blast, to the effects. The Russians used vacuum tubes in their guidance system, which were not vulnerable to it. So we were vulnerable, they were not, and we had to fix the missile system. Task force was put together. They worked on it for several weeks, and were making absolutely no progress. The general in charge, the General Kenneth Schultz at the time, he stopped it and said, we got to reorganize, we've got to get this fixed, because what the Russians will find out about this pretty quick, and we're going to be in deep trouble. You got to remember, in the mid-60s, folks, we were hot in the middle of the Cold War with the Russians. I mean, I was working with people who had been on alert during the Cuban Missile Crisis. They had been involved in that, so it was a serious threat. So he stopped it and reorganized, and again, I should have had nothing to do with this because I was in the ground electronic systems. I was a junior captain, but in the 3.5 years, I had developed a reputation as for a go-to person to solve tough problems. I mean, I had a tough problem, I found out I just solved problems. So in his reorganizing, he reached over in the ground system and moved me over with the missile and made me the project manager to harden the missile. That's the term that was used to make it impervious to nuclear effects. Well, what made that even more improbable was that the 9 project managers that were on that team that had parts of the missile, because each part of the missile had a different project office on it, were all lieutenant colonels and colonels. And if you've been in the military, you know how much a colonel likes taking orders from a captain. But that's the way it was. And that's a whole nother story, but I should have never had that job for multiple reasons, but that's what God did. But anyway, we did it. We got the job done, got the missile hardened, and I went on to be the project officer for developing a ground-based EMP detector, and an EMP detector mounted in the EC-135 aircraft. And I was project manager for several other very successful projects to do with the Minuteman missile. And then I left the Air Force, and because this thing was so highly classified, I never talked to anybody about it. I just put it out of my mind. It never came up anywhere. Never had any discussions with anybody. And then about 7 years ago, I picked up a magazine and read an article about the vulnerability of our grid system. And I said, whoa, we never thought about that in the 60s, because in those days, electricity was a luxury. I mean, I knew plenty of families that didn't even have electricity in the 60s. So it was a luxury. I didn't think about it. But it talked about a report that had been written by EMP Commission. And so I sent off for a copy of it. It came about a week later. I got it on a Friday, and I was started reading. I was so mesmerized by it. I read it all weekend. And when I got through, I said, I just kept going. I said, that's right. That's right. Yeah, I can believe that, and so on. I said, I wonder who wrote this. And son of a gun, I looked at the author, and there were people that I'd actually worked with in the Air Force on this problem, have been part of this commission and writing it. So I say all that to say that that's where I got started, and then there's more to it as I got into that. That was before I was even going to run for office. But then when I ran for office, I ran into somebody who was working by the name of Frank Gaffney, and some of you may know him, that we talked about. It came up in a conversation with him when we were at a forum on education talking about C-scope. Should have never come up, but it did. And so we talked about it and evolved anyway. It resulted in us putting together the first bill, the Senate in Texas, we got it through the Senate. But the reason it's so critical is out of the 21 designated critical infrastructure other sectors we have, like our chemical plants and our commercial facilities, communications, manufacturing, dams, transportation, etc. If we lose any one of those or seriously damage them, it hurts people and our economy. The only one up there that wipes out all the rest of them is our electrical grid system within the energy sector. This is the one that would take down the country all by itself. Now, why Texas is in a good position, I was talking to somebody a while ago about the Texas grid, because in the United States there are 3 grid systems: the eastern, the western, and then there's Texas. Now, for those of you that are saying that doesn't quite look like Texas, that's because that's the ERCOT. That's the Texas controlled part of the power grid system. We have some in the east, northeast, and western parts of Texas that are outside of ERCOT, but they will still be part of what we're talking about doing. It's just that we have the momentum of having our control of our electrical grid system in Texas right here. And when we say electrical grid, it has multiple parts to it, and there's lots of the different solutions for each part of it, but it goes from the generating stations. In Texas we have, what will be considered a few small number of generating stations, all the way out to the far end of thousands and thousands of customers. And so there are different solutions along the way, but the power is generated in a few locations and then transmitted over long distance by these high-powered lines. But beforehand, because electricity has to be elevated in voltage in order to travel long distances, we have high-voltage transformers. And these are huge, huge transformers weighing several thousand tons. Takes 24 to 36 months to get one, and we don't even make them in the United States anymore. They're only made in Germany and South Korea. And so we have to find a way to protect them because we can't replace them in this. And then, of course, you have the transmission lines that you see all over the country that are huge antennas that will attract the pulse. Then we get near where it's going to be used, they have the step-down transformers, and then finally where we actually use it in the consumption, whether it's residential or commercial. But that's the grid that we're talking about, and there are different solutions for different parts of it on how we go about protecting it. Now there are actually 3 types of pulses that we have to deal with. There's nuclear, which is created by a nuclear weapon detonated above the Earth's atmosphere. There's natural, which is almost identical to what you get with the nuclear that comes off of the sun. We generally call them sunspots. More technical term is a coronal mass ejection. They're just the way the sun operates. They come off of the sun in all directions and continuously coming off of them. The only time they're a problem for us is when they come off of the sun in a direction that's going to intercept our orbit around the sun. They go off other places and have no effect on us. It's only when they come near where an intersection of we would be. And then there are man-made, but there's a non-nuclear small devices. There have been several movies made where people used an EMP generator to knock out computers in casinos and things like that. And the military has them. We call them focused energy weapon systems. We have them on missiles and other devices out there. But those would cause havoc or fry the equipment in a very small area. It would not have the huge impact of a GMD or an EMP. And I think I covered most of this. Is it